afternoon. Welcome to another MWC Short. I'm Karen from the content team, and I'm joined today for an Industry X discussion with DeLisa Alexander, who's Executive Vice President and Chief People Officer with Red Hat. Welcome, DeLisa.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Thank you so much for joining us. And as I mentioned, we're here to talk about Industry X, where you had a keynote that was due to take place in the opening session for the Industry X theme. And Industry X really encompasses many of the different technologies that are shaping the future of our industries. Everything from industrial IoT to robotics and automation, looking at digital supply chains of the future, blockchain, manufacturing, auto, a whole load of different verticals. And also it's an area that's been quite heavily represented on the male side in the past. But I'm really honored to be talking to you as a leading female executive within Industry X, and also as a leader and chief people officer for Red Hat, which has a very unique culture. So we'll spend the next couple of minutes talking about why Industry X is such a big theme and what it means to you as well and to Red Hat as a company. So the first thing that I want to ask you, DeLisa, is around the concept of open innovation, which is a term we've heard before. As I mentioned, Red Hat has a very unique culture, and open source is a real part of what forms your culture there at Red Hat. So can you tell us a bit more about the notion of an open source culture and what default to open means?
Sure. So I'll just take us back a little bit. Red Hat started as kind of the first social movement on the internet. So this is way back 25 years ago. Thanks to the internet, developers could come together and contribute to the development of software code because they could see the source code. They were not able to draw boundaries over the internet. They were able to instead cross boundaries of organization, and then regardless of title or tenure or organization, they could contribute to the code to find the bugs, to make improvements. And all of this was made possible by really innovative use of copyright law. So I joined Red Hat as a second lawyer. And so I joined because I was really passionate about using copyright law to require sharing of the code versus to require confidentiality of the code. So I thought, wow, if everyone can see the code, regardless of organizational boundary, imagine what will happen in terms of the innovation that'll be spurred. So sure enough, after I joined Red Hat, that was absolutely the case. And so really interestingly to me, in my role, I joined as a lawyer, so I was expecting to be able to use that lawyer perspective. I used to be paid by the hour, so everything I would suggest would be usually adhered to by my clients. Well, being in-house at Red Hat was a very different conversation because hierarchy just didn't exist. And instead, we'd have conversations about which software license, for example, to use. And I frequently got overruled, even though I was the lawyer, because the developers were so passionate about the licenses that they selected to make sure their code could be treated the way they wanted it to be treated, that it was a totally different world for me, and it really blew my mind. But what I ended up learning is that people who work in open source software communities, they have some expectations about how people behave, and they really are values of the community. So they expect total transparency of the code and documentation on how that code's developed. They expect to be able to collaborate cross boundaries, and they don't ever think, oh, this person has this position, so therefore their contribution is going to be put into the main line. It's really all about the most value that's created. And so lack of hierarchy is a big value. And then the idea of releasing early and often and iterating is very much a foundation for how open source communities work. Well, you take all those values and you hire a lot of those people and bring them into your organization. What you have is an organization that is very, very different in terms of the expectations of the people. They expect leaders at Red Hat, people who are decision makers, like the maintainers in a software code, to behave like community managers, to be transparent, to explain context, to give everyone an opportunity to contribute and participate. And that has been a foundation that has been really interesting because we were a publicly traded software company. We have, things we have to be confidential about, and then balance that with the expectation of people who expect you to share everything with them to for them to be able to contribute and give feedback. So I had a big learning journey going from a law firm into this environment. And it's been really fun for the last 19 years to now have developed kind of a different gut instinct. And now my instinct as a leader is to default to open, to default to sharing context, to default to asking for participation, and also to default to a mindset that I probably don't have the best answer. Probably, if I gave my perspective and then we invited lots of other perspectives to join in the conversation, the answer that we come up with or the solution would be much more innovative, much more creative. And so now that is my current practice, is not to think that I have to solve everything, but rather to invite participation. And that is what is expected. So when we're working with customers, they're really interested in this, obviously, in the phenomenon that is kind of our culture that's quite different. But what we found is that because the expectation of open source software developers is very similar to the expectation of millennials, I want to be able to contribute. I don't want to pay my dues. I want to be able to just add value immediately, etc. It's made this organization a really interesting place for attracting diverse talent, and particularly millennials. And we were just named, one of the top employers for millennials, which I wasn't surprised, but we didn't ask for that honor. That's what the data showed. And so it's been fascinating that it is so attractive to millennials and does really help us with having that diverse talent that we need to innovate, which is another thing that our customers tend to be pretty interested in.
That's great. Thank you, DeLisa. And you were talking about your customers there and why they really like to get involved with that innovation. But how do you take companies on that journey, on an open journey, and towards better innovation?
It's definitely something that we spend a lot of time thinking about. So we have open technologies. And the thing is, if you are using open source technologies, those technologies work best with open practices. And so a lot of our customers make big investments in new technologies. And then what they find is that the great technology strategy or their new digital transformation strategy, that makes a lot of sense on paper. But then when they actually try to deploy that technology, their ways of working don't support the outcomes they're looking for. So then they come to us and they say, hey, how do you all do this? And so it's really interesting conversation. I've really enjoyed having these conversations with CIOs and other heads of people, because it's a really fascinating conversation. It's all about culture, which is my area. So the way that I usually talk to them is I ask them, tell me about your mission or your company's purpose. Let's talk about that. Let's ground ourselves in that foundation, because that's why we're here, right? You're not here to drive a technology strategy. You're here to have an outcome that is probably based on some type of higher purpose or mission. So grounding ourselves in that. Now let's take a step and let's talk about the strengths of your existing culture. Every culture has strengths and gaps. And we talk about which of those strengths are more aligned with supporting open practices that could be leveraged in consultation with their team to actually have better outcomes, while keeping in mind that the motivation for making these changes, it's really all about that purpose. And that tends to resonate greatly with people because, Red Hat is a default to open organization, but that took a lot of years of gut instinct to create, right? People are not necessarily going to be on a journey where suddenly they're all the way on the degrees of open all the way to the end. That's okay. People typically find that if they start small with a team that really has strong connection to their purpose and mission, that they can try some new behaviors, and then they can eventually try, iterate, fail, and find where it works for them and their culture, so they can be closer to a default to open organization while still respecting their heritage. And so that tends to resonate with our customers, and we're seeing them have some pretty good successes.
Fantastic. And one other question that I wanted to ask you in addition is, do you see that link between openness, default to open, diversity, and then that leading to greater results when it comes to innovation?
Absolutely. I mean, we all know that a more diverse team and more diverse perspectives leads to innovation. That's what the research shows. And so what we're finding with our customers is that when they're using the open technologies and open practices, they've got some pretty impressive outcomes. Like, for example, one of our customers recently shared with us that as they deployed both in tandem, they were able to cut the time to deploying new applications by 66%. So 66% faster deployment. And that's not just technology. That is technology plus open practices. And what a proof point. They're so thrilled. And so, it's important because, companies are getting disrupted. Everything is changing so rapidly. Agility and participation is so critical for innovation. And so those open practices really help to make that organization more attractive to diverse talent. So one concept that we hear a lot about is meritocracy. That's the idea that the best idea will win. And if you really value that, it doesn't matter where the ideas come from. What you find is that you have to really practice meritocracy and really be purposeful and inclusive when you want meritocracy to really exist. Otherwise, if you think you've achieved it, you probably haven't. You're probably going the wrong direction. And so at Red Hat, we spend a lot of time talking as an organization about how we can be more and more purposefully inclusive in our meritocracy. Why? Because every associate has a strength and a gap. And what we want to do is make sure every single person is able to contribute at their best based on their own strengths so that that innovation can really, really thrive. So far, it's working well, and it's great to be able to talk to customers about the way that they're approaching those same issues.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, DeLisa. And just finally, I'd love to get your thoughts. I hope that we get to see you at next year's MWC 2021 in Barcelona. What do you think might be coming up on next year's agenda, or what do you see as some of the big trends to watch out for coming into the future?
Well, one thing we've been watching is, the way that people are perceiving success with deploying new technologies, is big investments, and whether or not they're actually paying off. And there's one survey that said, 75% of CIOs say they have not yet seen the return on investment from these big deployments. Well, of course, my hypothesis is that it has to do with culture. And so, until we really get over that learning curve and people really start to adopt new ways of working, I think that's going to continue to be something that hinders companies from really going on these digital transformations that they want to go on. So I suspect next year we're not going to be over that finish line, and it'll still be a really hot topic. But I think we'll have more learnings to share, because I think more companies will have been on that journey. So I think it'll be a hot topic next year.
Great, thank you so much, and I hope that we get to actually discuss that next year in Barcelona and some of these other themes, and see where we've gone from this year to next. DeLisa, thank you so much for joining us, and thanks for taking part in this MWC Short.
Absolutely, thank you so much.